few months after I moved in with my mom, she brought me to family therapy. And I remember I sat down, she sat down, and she told this psychologist, I think my daughter has ADD. And my mom had ADD. She thought that my brother had ADD, even though he was never diagnosed. Oh. He was 12 years older than me, and so was like, out of the house. And she's like, Emi is disorganized and chronically late. And when she reads, she gets hyper-focused, which is like a sure sign of ADD. And the doctor didn't say like, hey, okay, how can an 11-year-old be chronically late?
Yes. Tell me how she gets places. How would that work?
Yeah. Or like, how is she disorganized, right? Especially living in a home where like you can't use the oven. Like, why isn't her organization transcending that? But, I really believe my mom was trying to help me.
Yeah.
And she thought, she couldn't do everything she wished she had for my brother. And that she looked around our living situation and she was like, okay, this happened when Emi moved in with me. Like, this must be Emi.
I see.
Yeah. And so, this psychologist, he gave me like a form. I filled out like a little checklist. My mom filled out a checklist and my teacher filled out a checklist. And then the next session we come back and he's like, okay, Emi should be medicated. I got the diagnosis of ADD. I was like referred to a psychiatrist. And after I saw the psychiatrist once, I went to a physician's assistant and I got Concerta and then Adderall. And spoiler, I did not have ADD.
Yeah.
And those drugs, they can feel great. Like I've taken them a little later in life, like off label. But back then it was terrifying.
Yes.
Like to be a child who's like never even had coffee before and then get prescription speed.
Yes.
I had like a panic attack. I freaked out.
Oh, totally.
And I like the first day on the drugs, I hit a kid over the head with a textbook. Like I had never been violent. I had never done anything like that. And like, granted, he was like acting badly towards a classmate. Like we both got detention, but I was so scared because I was like, that's not like me.
Yes.
And I was like, what has happened to me? And it seemed like a irreversible thing. And like, once I had kind of seen that darkness, it was like, I don't think I can ever go back. Like, I think I'm just broken now. And the doctors kind of treated it that way too. Like, I got Xanax right away.
Yes.
Which made me feel better.
Because they're just flipping backward on your chart all of a sudden. And before, like, there was nothing. And then all of a sudden, there's just like case history.
Yeah. And then once you have one diagnosis, everything is like in reference to that diagnosis. And so they were like, okay, well, the ADD meds didn't work. Yeah. We're going to try Prozac. Like, you must be depressed if Ritalin doesn't help you. And from there, it just started this cycle where I went through a dozen drugs.
It's like a water slide, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like once you get on that train, like you can't get off.
Yeah.
And it was the early 2000s. Like people didn't think about like there's withdrawal that happens, there's side effects, and obviously these meds, they can be really helpful to people when they're used like in the right way. And also a lot of people get them and then struggle in similar ways that I did.
Listening to your story, it reminds me of something that Tara Westover said about like binaries of people want to say, like parents are either all good or all bad, or, in this case, professionals are either all good or all bad, and we should be grateful. And she said about her parents, well, yeah, my parents were doing their best, and their best was devastating. And I really liked the idea that even if we're locked into something, like it doesn't explain away the cost of it just to say people were doing their job. It doesn't. Yeah. It doesn't explain away that cost.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I don't think anybody had bad intentions at all. But I think it's a really systemic problem with particularly when like children who are in vulnerable situations are getting treated, how we have, this therapeutic model where we have diagnoses and labels, and that's like the primary way we're thinking about things. It and where the primary treatments are like individualized therapy and medication, it does a really bad job of finding like the systemic problems, or even just like the slightly larger, like the family problem or the community problem.
Yes.
And then it just ends up being put onto
Yes.
like an individual young person.
Yes.
And in America, we're all about the individual. We're
Oh
like,
my
that's
gosh,
the only thing that
it's
matters.
the worst. Even just like coming back to your, like, this 11-year-old is chronically late is like a perfect little microcosm of like the rest of the years that followed for you. You're naming a kind of like theory of agency, a theory of whether or not we have the ability to act that we don't have enough language for in our culture. We really don't. We will say everything is possible, or we will say nothing is possible. And either iteration is just frankly not true.
Yeah. Wow. I love that theory. I'm going to think about things like that more now.
Especially your teenage years, it's like just watching you try to figure out what your options are every time. Like you're in so many different kinds of worlds trying to figure out the framework of choice. It's a bit like theoretical, but like that's totally how I see your beautiful brain at work. Do you mind walking me through, like, you had to leave your mom's home, and then like what happened next?
Yeah. So when I was 13 and 14, I was hospitalized a number of times. I loved the hospital. There was clean showers, like good food, air, no mice. And then when I was 14, I finally got sent to this locked treatment facility. And it was like a place from the movies with the cinder block walls, bars over the windows, soundproof glass. And we were basically not let outside for the first month. And then it was like, if you were good, you got to go outside for like 2 hours a day.
Wow.
And then the rest of the time you're in this facility, you go to school there, little classroom on site. And this whole time I was being told by adults this message of like, you messed up. Like, you're here because you had bad behavior, and you not only need to fix your behavior, but if you ever want to be happy, you're going to need to accept your circumstances. And I was like, I don't see a life worth living when I'm looking around me, right? When I'm thinking about spending the rest of my life on these antipsychotics that I was on, like the outcomes for people coming out of there were like, really crappy jobs, like really living like subsistence lives. And so I was like, okay, if you're going to force me to stay alive and be on this hellhole planet, I need to find a way to have a life that I'm happy with.
Yes.
And for me, like, I was a little bookworm. And so I was like, I really want to go to college. And ideally, I want to go to Columbia University in the city of New York because it's in New York City.
Totally.
And,
Absolutely.
Who doesn't want to go there? And so I started, studying from these ACT books from the library. And that was how I found, like, the meaning in my life.
Yes. But then, like, every time somebody tried to manage you by setting low expectations, it sounded like that was a very painful kind of certainty. Like, just saying, I don't know, because I just find that in the worst moments of my life, like, I can't stay locked in the present. That's why our brains mercifully toggle back and forth between like lovely moments in the past you can pull into that second, or like hopes for the future that you can somehow conjure up. But like the idea that you would then have to sort of have a low expectation was that must have felt like either almost certain failure or just like an inability then to dream a different reality.
Yeah, absolutely. I was surrounded by these people who said that hope just makes you depressed, and that seemed to blame the depression of these kids most of whom who had been neglected and abused, that it was because of their over optimism. And that, like, if we just really had an attitude adjustment downward of what life should be like, then everything would be hunky-dory. And, as an adult, I understand the statistics a lot better about how rare it really is to go to college and graduate college and have stability. At the same time, like, you can't just tell me to live without giving me something to live for.
Oof.
Yeah. And it seemed like such a missed opportunity, because, like, I was 14 and I was not willing to do a single thing to get better. Like, I did not want to get over my eating disorder. I didn't want to stop self-harming.
Yeah.
I had been abusing leftover Adderall. I certainly did not want to stop doing that. But I was willing to do anything to achieve my dreams. And I think most teenagers are like that.
Yeah.
And even if that dream is kind of unrealistic or something that's maybe not going to happen, it's like, why could people have not used that as, like, okay, you want to go to college, like, here's what it takes to go to college, right? Yeah. And you're not going to be able to go to the place you want to go if you are not eating and you're hospitalized for starvation, right? Like, that's not going to be an outcome. And so that was like, and I feel so lucky. Okay, we're not supposed to say that on the show, but the thing that I feel like, yeah,
I like it, Emi, do it.
But the thing that I feel lucky about is that I'm the kind of person who doesn't like being told I can't do something.
Yeah, that's right. You don't. I feel that, like, sliver of iron in you, and it's just wonderful.
Thank you. I mean, because I was at this treatment center. I was studying for the ACT. I was reading Joan Didion and Annie Dillard. And I was, like, happier that I had been in, like, years, even though I was eating, like, industrial chicken a la king and, like, hot dish and couldn't go outside. Oh. But then they took away my books because they were like, these books are a distraction. Ugh. Like, you need to not think about the future. You need to focus on being a kid, on healing, whatever that means to heal. And I think so many people would have been broken by that. And people are always saying, like, oh, I wasn't broken because I'm, like, this special person or I have this magic trick. And I'm just like, no, I was just mad. And I'm so glad that I was mad. And then I was like,
yes,
screw you. I'm going to prove you all wrong.
Yes, totally. That's so funny, because it's true. Sometimes there's these wonderful little glitches in our programming where it saves us, and it was just there all along. And, like, yeah, I mean, me being angry at the right time it saved my life. And it, had I not needed anger to validate the part of me that felt totally disposable, then I wouldn't have saved. Then I just wouldn't have thought there was anything worth saving. So,
man, I feel like we need to cultivate anger. We need, like, an anger practice, especially for people who are, like, young women and girls. Like,
totally.
They need to get on, like, a bike in New York City, right? And navigate through traffic. Like,
oh my gosh, one of the funniest little, those little, like name tag plaques you can get for your desk or something. One of my friends got me one that just said "Stay angry" because they were like, actually, this was working for you. Maybe let's.
I love that. I want one now.
I will make you a "Stay angry" one.